Forgot that it's just a little bit after noon, so we can go ahead and get started. Well, welcome everyone to the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative and University of Minnesota Extension webinar. I'm Matt Russell with the University of Minnesota. We're really happy today to have a great set of presentations on wood utilization in the urban forest. But before we get started, I wanted to just kind of a brief introduction to the WebEx system that you're seeing. You should be seeing slides that Brian and Doug will present off on the left-hand side of the system. And off on the right, you should see my webcam and Brian, our first speaker, his webcam as well. And we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. And so there are two ways to do that. What we suggest you use is on the lower right, there's a Q&A section in WebEx. And so if you click on that, it may be minimized for you to start, but if you click on it, you should see a chat area open up, and you can ask a question that way as well. There is also a chat area where we'll be sending kind of some links for things that Brian and Don might mention. Our suggestion is that if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A feature that's in the lower right side in WebEx. And so with that, this is our last webinar of 2017. However, we do have the full program announced for next year's webinar series as well. And I know that Eli Sagor shared a link to that. We'll share that again before the end of this webinar today. But our next webinar, our first webinar of 2018, will be on January 16th. And that will be with John Carlson of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And he'll be talking about changes to the Sustainable Forest Education Incentive Act program and kind of what that means for Minnesota landowners and the people that work with Minnesota landowners in their work. And so that first one of 2018 is on January 16th. And we'll share an announcement and a link to all of those webinars that we're doing next year during this webinar. And so with that, I want to introduce our first speaker for the webinar. Brian Brashaw is a program manager with the U.S. Forest Service. He's going to talk about wood utilization options for urban trees. And so I first saw Brian and Don present on this topic at the Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference. There's just a really lot of valuable information here about what we can do with some of these forest products that are coming from the urban forest. And so Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you and make you the presenter. And you should be able to advance the slides. So take it away, Brian.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Happy December. So as Matt said, I'm with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm at our Forest Products Laboratory, which is in Madison, Wisconsin. Although I still spend quite a bit of time in Duluth and in Minnesota, which is my home. For 25 years, I was with the University of Minnesota Duluth Natural Resources Research Institute, and some of the work that we're going to share today to talk about urban wood utilization was done at that point. Don Peterson, who will be joining us about half past the hour, Don is one of our program delivery partners and has really added a lot of expertise in mechanized urban harvesting and workforce development, among other areas that Don really focuses in with his firm. This work was initially funded through the Forest Service, the Wood Education Resource Center. There's been a lot of other really great cooperators along the way, and as I said, Don and his team has been involved in a whole host of organizations as well. So really a great effort by Don and his team to kind of bring this to reality. So I'm going to speak a little bit to this publication. So this is one that you can find online, wood utilization options for urban trees. We put this together really with a goal to try to be able to put a one-stop shop for land managers, arborists, urban specialists, to have information on wood species, the markets. And one of the things that we're in process of adding right now is the 5th chapter. So if you go online, there's a variety of places. If you Google it, or if you go to emerald-borer.info, you can find it pretty easily. But our goal when I wrote this, emerald ash borer was not identified in northwest Wisconsin or northeast Minnesota. And so one of my goals was really to put this publication together if and when EAB was identified in northeast Minnesota. The if happened and when happened a little sooner, I think, than most of us had hoped. But again, this was really put in place to try to help organizations and land managers and others really understand some of the basics. So Chapter 5 or Part 5, Mechanized Urban Harvesting, Don Peterson's going to talk about that today. We're going to add that. So we're in a process of updating that publication, and that'll be a chapter that'll be added in 2018. Really a nice publication, I think, that ties all this together. Our goal wasn't, I'm a wood utilization specialist, but what we really tried to do again was identify a couple of issues that we're dealing with: emerald ash borer, Asian longhorned beetle, gypsy moth, and then thousand cankers disease, which was kind of a late addition, but it is affecting black walnut east of the Mississippi in the United States. So those are basically some of the urban species that we are challenged with. I think we know very much about emerald ash borer, and that is present really broadly. As you can see here, most of our northeastern states in all the way down into Arkansas, Louisiana, and now touching into Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, with also Colorado affected there. So you can see right at the tip of we're Duluth and St. Louis County, the southeast part of St. Louis County, and Douglas County in Wisconsin, and then basically from the Minneapolis border down through the southern half of Wisconsin and the eastern half of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So those are kind of our closest breadbasket to where we're at. So this is updated pretty frequently. This being December 1 of this year. Emeraldashborer.info is really a terrific source of information if you're not already familiar with it. Millions of hits. If you Google EAB, this is where you're going to land. Initially, when we put that publication together, there wasn't much on wood use. So what we worked with Michigan Tech and others to put this together was wood use options. So on the left menu, if you click into wood use options, there's a number of publications, including the one that we're talking about today. Gypsy moth, again, we're looking at cutting across Wisconsin, and then into western Minnesota, northeast, or western Wisconsin, northeast Minnesota. So again, it's an invasive that has impacts for our urban and traditional forestry materials. Asian longhorned beetle, for those of you that are familiar with that, it's much less selective. Significant infestation areas that have been identified, and significant not so much in land-based, but in terms of impact and significant efforts to eradicate those areas. So those are things that we're very familiar with. Has again a significant impact to a lot of the species that we would find in both our urban and natural forests. Thousand cankers disease might be one that people are a little less familiar with. Really impact to black walnut, and identified initially in Tennessee in 2010. So there are quarantines in place with green walnut across the Midwest. There's a really nice website that's been put together, thousandcankers.com. So again, good information. These are all the kinds of things that are embedded within Part 1 or Chapter 1 of this of that publication I referenced earlier. We tried to put some just basic information about properties together. We're often, again, depending on what our background is, maple, ash, other species that are affected. We really tried to provide some basic wood property information. So these are things, again, there's a variety of publications out there, but we really tried to bring all of this into one place. So the species that are probably most affected are going to be our hardwood species, ash and birch and maple and oak. So we try to put basic characteristics and their importance, relative importance for a variety of different use in properties and other applications. Certainly by far the greatest emphasis was, okay, we have these, we have EAB. What options exist for ash? what are we going to do? What's out there? Where does it make sense? Where might it not make sense? So this third chapter, and where I'm going to spend a little bit more time today, is kind of walking through, the variety of different applications. And ash is a pretty important species, and black, green, white. We use it in different ways. Certainly we've got, again, everything from our sporting goods products. While baseball bats are increasingly being made out of maple and yellow birch, ash is certainly an important species there. The industrial markets like pallets and crating make some beautiful furniture. And, certainly we have applications for biomass as well. So, the whole range of different product applications that we're looking at with these species. It can be used. This is a library in Michigan. So these are ash logs that have been harvested from the site and then used in a structural as a column application. So again, the urban wood utilization approach has become more common and more popular in the last decade. We have, a variety of architects and designers, thinking very carefully about the different species that are present, what's being removed, and how it can be used. In the Minneapolis area, for instance, there's a company called Wood from the Hood, and that business has really done a fine job of taking urban wood and reutilizing it in just a host of furniture and desk and other applications. So it's found in everything from bar tops to other tabletop or counter type systems. So just a whole bunch of ideas if you think kind of carefully about what can be done with urban wood. Typically the greatest volume again is often sawn in a lot of urban settings. So for instance, in Madison or even in Minneapolis, your smaller wood miser systems are very prevalent. But Don Peterson is going to share with us a little bit later, when we do this in a volume basis, this opens up really new markets that need volume. They need truckload quantities. They don't need onesie, twosie trees at a time. So lumber typically in the 4/4, so that's really 1 inch thick up to 2/4 inch thick, 2-inch thicknesses with a variety of widths. So these are typically often the wood miser mills, or where volume is adequate and the number of logs are adequate, it can be sawn in traditional saw mill settings, again based on quarantine and travel restrictions and whatnot. So in Wisconsin, with the southern half of the state, under quarantine you have the ability to transport in a wider range. So NHLA, Northern Hardwood, or National Hardwood Lumber Association grades, everything from very clear to what we would consider character, or perhaps 3 common materials. So a lot of variety there in lumber. There's some beautiful urban logs that can often be considered for veneer. Extreme caution in veneer. You've got either slicing or peeling. Again, it's a beautiful wood, but we need to think about metal contamination, and that really needs to be a significant consideration. Urban trees have lots of, especially street trees or boulevard trees. It gets a little bit different when you're into some, more rural urban settings like golf courses or city parks, around ski trails, those kinds of situations. I think that opens up, the ability for some of these really high quality logs, because that helps pay for its way out. So veneer is a very high quality and highly valuable material. There's lots of furniture. There's some high-end furniture designers like Herman Miller and others that have identified and used ash in just a variety of different settings, and we're starting to see more and more reclaimed lumber, and some of that reclaim is from urban forests, and some of that reclaim is from urban deconstruction. But it's certainly that reuse and story associated with these kinds of species can be really important. So whether it's stamped with the address or it's stamped with the date that the building was was deconstructed or the tree was harvested, and sometimes it's a combination of both. So there's some unique artists that have really embraced in Chicago. Some of the urban wood specialists have really taken and tried to design high quality pieces of furniture around ash and other products. As you look at this, most people would say, hey, wow, this is a beautiful oak kitchen. Certainly ash has characteristics that look very much like oak. We often have the ability to do both. A lot of our wood products now are some combination where you might have solid sawn material, for instance, on your cabinet doors, your stiles, your rails, your outside frame. That may be solid wood, and the cabinet insert might be a composite panel with a veneer that has been laminated, 3D laminated under heat and pressure, a veneer insert panel. So again, you have this ability to create and use both solid and veneered products. We also see, both clear grades. As you can see, this is mostly a clear grade, which is probably what most of us think about. But we know that rustic grades, alder is one species that certainly we think about when it comes to rustic grades of cabinetry. Cabinets are, it used to be your kitchen and your bathroom, but now you're seeing more and more cabinets in closets, in garages. So, the cabinetry market could be very particularly rewarding. Oftentimes, millwork has that, again, potential. So if you're looking at cabinetry, you always want to have often matching millwork. So there's some beautiful trim and millwork and doors that have all the potential in the world to be made out of ash, and it really comes down to small custom manufacturers. They may be very small volume producers, but then lumber that is working its way through the value chain into larger cabinetry companies. Again, they to build a product family around ash or any urban wood species requires adequate volume. So when the larger the company that you're dealing with as a producer, the more reliable and the more volume that they're going to be looking for to be able to move forward. And so this happens to be a company that was in Minneapolis known as Environment. This was black ash from Minnesota, combination of solid and veneer-based products. That was the entryway into their office compounds. So store fixtures, banks, those kinds of situations, again, oftentimes have the ability to be a little bit unique and to tell a story. And the story with urban wood utilization is really important. Flooring, there are companies that are using ash. The flooring market is changing. It used to be really the 2 1/4 inch solid strip flooring, like you'd see in a gymnasium. That has been really traditional for a long period of time. We're seeing more and more plank flooring, and that plank flooring can be solid material up to 3, 4, 5 inches wide. Important drying characteristics, important machining. The larger width you get with solid material, the less dimensionally stable it's going to shrink and swell a little bit more. But there's been a growth, a really big growth in engineered. So what that means is you might have a wear layer of a hardwood material, anywhere from 3/16 to maybe 1/4 inch, which would be flat laminated onto an engineered base. And that engineered base could be a plywood base. It could be, typically a hardwood would be a plywood base, a Baltic birch plywood base for balance purposes. So, variety of grades, unfinished, pre-finished. The flooring market has changed from, over the last 15 years. Biomass or mulch or firewood. These are really big markets. And while Minnesota does not, has a couple of very small wood pellet manufacturers, you're starting to see ash with the potential. It makes a very nice pellet. I know that a number of, at the research level, UMD's Natural Resources Research Institute has really made some nice combination species. So balsam fir and ash, black ash, for instance. Again, it has the potential to do, the heating markets, or In some cases, maple and oak are often used in in barbecue markets. So we don't think about that often, but there's a lot of grills now that are using wood-based pellets. Firewood is a big deal. There's still a significant volumes, and it's something we worry about because firewood is something that moves around a lot. There's been all sorts of campaigns around don't move firewood, keep it local, buy it local. I grabbed this from Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and this is how often emerald ash borer moves. It doesn't move just by its natural flight characteristics. It moves down the highway at 65 miles an hour as people are going from their town to their cabin and vice versa, or taking wood with them camping. So again, it's a pretty significant situation. There's the homeowner version, and then there's the kind of the commercial. We have commercial firewood producers, and commercial firewood producers to meet there is a heat treatment standard, and USDA APHIS has put this in place. And this standard really allows us to think about how is it that we're heat sterilizing. So basically, the current regulation is that the core of, so by inserting temperature sensors during the kiln process, the heating process, needs to reach 140 degrees for 60 minutes. So that is a standard. It's been lowered a little bit in the early first decade of the 2000s. It was 160 for 75 minutes. It's been reduced to 140 for 60. So certified firewood producers that are moving firewood outside of the quarantine zones, this is a process that they need to go through. And I think Minnesota, I looked at the site, the Department of Agriculture site, I think there's 6 or 7 certified firewood producers. Wisconsin has similar. And there's a process involved, and so it includes an actual on-site test to try to find the cold spot in a kiln, or to be able to make sure that your temperature sensors are in representative size materials, and there's tracking and compliance agreements and permits. So it's a process to be put in place, but that process is what allows for, quote, certified firewood to move forward. There's a whole chapter in in that urban wood utilization manual I referenced earlier. I just wanted to kind of hit that as we're talking about it. This is a big market. So I know we don't often think about pallets and shipping containers and railroad ties as really, as high of interest as things like furniture or flooring or cabinetry. But ultimately, over 50% of hardwood species often end up in these important materials. So there's a variety of approaches, again, through heat sterilization and other approaches. There's the railroad tie market is substantial. Ash and other urban wood species work just fine for ties, but again, for some of these larger volume markets, it requires larger volume amounts of wood. So I know Don is going to speak to that in a couple of case studies where you have that volume of material to be able to move forward. But this is really an important application that probably doesn't get enough credit: pallets, railroad ties, and shipping containers. Sporting goods, I'm still, I'm a coach at heart, and a lot of youth sports, and whether you're out with your snowshoes or you play baseball, those are still important. But one of the things with lacrosse, it's a growth sport. You often think about things like carbon and carbon shafts and all this kind of stuff. While those are lightweight and kind of fancy, a lot of the players prefer an ash handle. So to them, it's kind of a unique higher end product. So again, it's a low volume situation, but there are a lot of specialty products that are available that are often used with ash, whether it be gun stocks or picture frames, or if you go to Etsy.com and you do a search, you can really find an amazing amount of things that have really been done with some of these species. And I mentioned Wood from the Hood. They're in Minneapolis. They've really done a terrific job. But trade shows and craft shows really have a lot of opportunities for smaller, unique pieces of wood from an urban setting. we don't usually think about wood from an engineered standpoint, but the Forest Products Laboratory, University of Minnesota, Duluth, Michigan Tech, and some other folks in the early 2000s did some work to look at structural applications of hardwood lumber. We tend not to saw in a 2x consistency, but we've built 3 Habitat for Humanity homes where this material has gone into trusses in Duluth on Grand Avenue, a little bit past the Forest Service Supervisor's office. It can be used in structural applications. Glulam, post and beam construction, and then there's a whole new category of product called mass timber. One of mass timber products is cross-laminated timber. So again, we have this potential to take advantage of urban or hardwood lumber species, and in appropriate volumes. It has excellent structural capacity, has a lot of performance. So these are just some variety of things that are out there that we can use these markets to take forward. So with that, I'm Matt, ready to take a few questions now or look at the chat or Q&A box, but that wraps up my part of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Brian. We do have one question come in, and maybe this is more of a comment about wood from the hood. Wood from the hood, they process and use approximately 100,000 board feet of urban wood per year, just as for our information. So Brian, it sounds like a lot of utilization options for urban wood. Yeah,
there is, and their markets are, part of that growth has been them understanding, the Seaver Cabinet Company is kind of a sister company, understanding those markets and how to connect with customers, and some really large customers have helped drive that forward. There's those kinds of urban wood markets really nationally, not to the size of wood from the hood, but it is certainly an opportunity that entrepreneurs can take forward. I've toured the one here in Madison, Badger Woodworks, and I know Don is going to speak a little bit more to some of the urban forestry market development efforts that are going forward.
Great, thanks, Brian. I'm not seeing any more questions, but again, if you do have a question, there's the Q&A feature that's in the lower right there in WebEx, and so we'll come back to that. But for now, I'm wondering if we can switch over to Don. So now's the handoff. So Brian, I'll ask you to mute your mic. Eli, if you can make Don the presenter of the webinar, and then Don, you could unmute yourself and show your webcam, and we should be ready to go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Don. And I should say Don is with Renewable Resource Solutions, so he's going to follow up talking about some case studies, following up on a lot of what Brian talked about. And so, Don, I don't know if you're trying to turn on your webcam.
Yeah. Put up on the screen here.
Not necessary. So why don't you, we don't necessarily need to worry about that, but we can hear you fine, coming in loud and clear. So Don, you can take it away.
Okay, just a minute. Carrie's trying to get me set up here. Yeah. All right. Again, my name's Don Peterson. Work in a number of different capacities. Before I get into the case studies, I just wanted to talk about a project I've been involved with the last 3 years, bringing urban forestry full circle. And this is a project that Jessica Simons from Michigan and Edith Macra from Illinois had originally put together, submitted for a grant in 2013, didn't get it. We resubmitted and they didn't have the time in 2014, so I took the lead on it. We submitted and got the grant. So this is actually a 4-state project. We have Wisconsin Sustainable Resources Institute, which I'm involved with. Illinois Wood Utilization Team, which now is Rich Christensen. Michigan, Southeast Michigan RC&D, which is Jessica Simons. And Missouri Department of Conservation is Russell Hinna. And this is the full circle concept is tree from seed to value added end product. So basically the mantra we have is that the tree lives on after it dies. So it's aimed at doing utilization of trees once they serve their original purpose. And out of this effort, we came up with the Urban Wood Network. That was something we just started here in the last few months. It's a website that's up and running. We'll have the website address up at the end of the presentation. But this is an effort that is in these 4 states right now. It could expand beyond those, but the whole idea is to brand urban wood, is to give it a purpose. And so everybody identifies with it. We've got a number of members that are working with architects and engineers to get it into their plans. So in places where they're putting in a new building and they have to clear trees off of the lot to put it in, they're working with the architects to actually put the lumber in the building as they're building it. So the key tenets, urban trees have their highest value while living. Sustainable recovery and the highest and best use of urban forest products are essential components of sustainable urban forestry. Increased end user demand. So there's the constant chicken and the egg in this, as there is in a lot of forestry applications, is what we need a demand for the forest products, and then we also need the resource. The Urban Wood Network will effectively achieve this mission through collaboration and information sharing, and we're committed to working in partnership with diversity of stakeholders. So we're working with everybody from the municipalities and homeowners that own the wood, to the arborists that cut it down, to the processors, to the value-added people, and to the people that eventually buy it. So from there, I will get into the case studies. Brian talked a lot about the end products. I'm going to talk about the raw materials to get to those end products. And this is a photo from a demonstration we actually did 7 years ago in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and I'll be getting into that shortly. And part 5, as Brian mentioned, of the publication he talked about is going to deal with urban mechanized harvesting. And this is basically marrying the 2 industries, is traditional logging, cut to length systems in particular, with urban tree removal where you have large volumes of trees. And what are the options available to these ownerships to remove large volumes of trees efficiently, safely, cost effectively, and quickly? And that's where we came up with bringing logging into the urban setting. And it's, even though I said this was 7 years ago we did the demonstration, and the demonstration went very well, it still has not been received totally. There's been a lot of interest in it. I will talk about the first really big project we did with it in 2016, and there's a couple more in the works in Wisconsin, but we hope that it's going to take off a lot more than it presently has. You know, the advantages of mechanized harvesting, as Brian talked about, is typically if you're an arborist, you take down a few trees a day, as many as 10 maybe. When we're talking about mechanized harvesting, we're talking about 50 to 200 trees in a day, depending on the on-site logistics. Safety, the operators, as opposed to a guy with a chainsaw or climbing a tree, you got a guy in the cab operating a saw that can reach up 20 to 30 feet to take a tree from the top down. And then for the public, you know, we're talking, you know, our best time was 20 seconds to take a tree down and process it, up to, I think the most we had was 15 minutes. So if you compare that to an arborist cutting a tree down where they have to climb and take a lot of time to do it, there's more safety concerns out there, both for the people doing the work and the public. And marketing of wood products, as Brian said, the more volume you have, the more markets you can get into. There is interest in cutting a single tree down and getting a a one-of-a-kind board or mantle or tabletop from a tree that grew in your yard. But if you're going to cut down 4,200 trees from golf courses and county parks, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, then you got some real volume where you can talk about marketing, mass producing, going to the architects, the engineers, that sort of thing. And the goal of mechanized harvesting is not to make money for the municipality. Like I said, the main purpose for trees, urban trees, is for their shade value, other values. But the big thing that mechanized harvesting can do is reduce the tree removal costs. So we look at this as reducing costs, not bringing in income. And making urban mechanized harvesting work is you have a logging company that doesn't have a whole lot of knowledge about urban environment, and then you have a municipality that has very little knowledge for the most part. We have found exceptions about logging. So bringing the two together is an issue. How do you make that work? What's the key to making that work? And the key that we've found in talking to them is having a go-between. And the go-between can be either somebody from the municipality, somebody from the logging company, or in a case I'll show you in a little bit, is where myself as a consultant stepped in between to make it work. Project oversight, it can be municipal staff if you have that expertise on staff. We've got a case going on in the city of Racine right now where they're going to be doing harvesting this winter, and they do have a forester on staff that was very comfortable with overseeing the operation. He's going to be doing it. As I mentioned, I took on that role last year with Kenosha County in one project that we did. And also there are a lot of logging contractors that either have like a foreman or even have a forester hired that could potentially fill that role. But then how do you work? How do you negotiate the price and all that? And that's just things to be aware of as you're getting into doing a large removal like we're talking about here. The mechanized logging equipment, we're talking about harvesters where they cut the tree down and they also cut it up into product length. Forwarders in the corner over here, in upper left corner, that you pile the wood on to bring it out to a site. And then rubber tired versus tracked. You know, that was the whole selling point with the cut to length systems, is to have rubber tired equipment so you could drive down city streets and not do a lot of damage. The project I did down in Kenosha, you can see this fixed head harvester here has tracks on it. Once the ground was frozen, they did not do any damage at all. So you can use the track machines in certain applications. The logger we dealt with actually had two different crews. One was rubber tired, one had the track machines. So you've got to look at that. In the lower right-hand corner here, we've got on a golf course, you can see the indentation here. Afterwards, they were very happy with how minimal the damage actually was after we were through out there. And then planning a urban tree removal is, you know, you got to figure out what trees are to be felled. And initially, the one project I was involved with in Kenosha, it was easy. It's you take all the ash out. Well, then all of a sudden you start looking and you've got box elder, you got black walnut, you got hackberry, that, you know, in the winter, a guy in the cab, he shouldn't have to make that decision. So we ended up painting all the trees, even though 99% of them were ash. We painted them to make sure that the logger knew what he was, what the harvester operator knew what he was going to be taking down. And what needs to be done with the tree when it is felled. Some areas we can leave the tops. If you're working along the wood line, you can put the tops into the woods. They're not concerned about it. Obviously, if you're out on the fairway, like this photo is showing here on the top, you got to get those tops out of there. So part of what the logger has to do is, he can utilize the bole of the tree, but he also has to bring the tops out in order to clean up the property. And then removal area specifications, what really needs to be done, how low do the stumps need to be, that sort of thing. Aware of obstacles, golf course, obviously you have sprinkler systems, you have the greens, you have the tees, where can you go? So we have to map all that out. And then what is cleanup? What's realistic for a forwarder with a grapple on it? What can it pick up? And we had to prepare the municipality to, not every stick is going to be picked up. There is going to be debris left afterwards. And contract specifications, who's doing what? And safety is a huge thing. If you're operating on a city street, obviously you got to control traffic. We worked in a park, golf course, obviously we did it in the off season, but in that part of the world, they still use the golf course year round for hiking, various things where people are out there. So you have to decide whether you're going to restrict areas, shut them down, that sort of thing. Work specifications, where can you operate, where can't you operate, hours of operation. Some of these loggers would be very happy operating through the night. Is there a noise issue, that sort of thing. When you're trucking, when can you pull out if you're in an urban environment? Should you restrict the trucking to certain times to not get into heavy traffic situations? Wood security, there's a wood on the ground. It's amazing how many people in the urban environment buy fire or use firewood, and they think it's free for the taking. So how do you have wood security? Equipment security is another big thing. These two pieces of machinery average between 500,000 and 700,000 each. How do you keep them secure at night on site? So is there a way that you can ensure that you aren't going to have problems with somebody vandalizing? Key points: safety, communication. You always need communication between the municipality people and your operators out on site. And if you want to be effective and get the wood out in the minimum time possible, is you can't have interruptions. The guy in the harvester is going to be most productive if he's in the harvester, not out of it. So you got to have everything set up so they're as functional and efficient as possible when they're on the site. Situation assessment and planning, just making sure that what needs to be done. You have a common agreement. What needs to be done and how are you going to operate? Where do you pile the wood? Take care of all the logistics as much as possible ahead of time, but always be prepared to adapt. And this is looking at one area, Petrifying Springs Park and Golf Course. They did a tree inventory with a grant from the Wisconsin DNR in 2013 and determined they had over 5,000 ash trees between 2 golf courses and 2 parks. And so the data that was collected is they went through, you can see all these green stars on the map here are individual trees that were inventoried. The blue squares are where there were bunches of trees, not immediately out in, they were in the wood line. They were not immediately out in the golf course or in the park area. But there was a number of trees there, and what the specifications here were to cut all ash trees within 60 feet of the boundary of a use area. So you would go into the woods up to 60 feet to take all ash trees out. So this was an inventory that was done by Kenosha County Parks. And then the project timeline. priorities and goals. How quick does it have to be out? A lot of these loggers have contracts up to 3 years ahead of time. So if you put a bid out in October and expect it to be cut that winter, it's probably not going to happen. And what's your budget? What is your budget for doing this? And I'll get into that in a little bit. Available staff. Even though you're going to have a logger in there, you need staff from the municipality to assist with logistics, if there's stuff that needs to be protected, the safety of the public, the safety of workers that might be out there doing something else. And then the municipality always has to take into account, what are they going to do? If we're taking out 5,000 trees, how are they going to be replaced? So planning a large scale removal, you got to create a bid package, do a pre-bid tour where you go out there with all the interested companies and explain to them exactly what you want done, when you want it done, and then accept the bids. And public relations is a huge thing. In all 3 projects, I've been involved in 2 demonstrations and 1 the actual removal in Kenosha County is public relations, getting it out to the media, doing interviews, putting signs up like this one in the slide right here is essential to be proactive. I talked to a number of people when we were out there doing the large scale removal in the county parks and the golf courses. And they said, we don't like to see this, but we understand it. So it was something that they did a really good job of. And then utilization of products. The public likes to hear the whole recycling message that we're actually utilizing the trees that are being taken down. The case studies I'm going to get into are 2 demonstrations that we did. Winnebago County Parks, Oak Creek, which I already mentioned, which actually this backdrop here is from Oak Creek, and then the Kenosha County Parks, which was a actual project that was bid out and harvested. So first, Winnebago County Parks, this is actually done through the Full Circle project that I talked about. It just so happened that the Great Lakes Timber Professionals Association had their logging expo in Oshkosh. They had equipment down there. Ponzi said that they'd be more than happy to demonstrate their equipment in an urban situation. The Winnebago County Parks, which is part of Oshkosh, is part of Winnebago County. We had a site within 5 miles of the expo site, so it worked out very well. We took down 100 cottonwood trees from around actually a pond area. It's really hard to see the ponds back here. The cottonwood grew up through the fence that was around the pond. And we went in and took out 100 mainly cottonwood, some other trees we took out of the median. But here's just a sequence shot, large cottonwood starting to be cut. Here's the next shot, and then as it's falling. And this is a shot of the fence where the cottonwood was found. You can see the harvester in the background here. They did a really good job. Only one place did they hit the fence, and they told the park manager they were going to hit the fence if they cut it down, and he said, have at it. They said there's just no other way to take it down. So here we were taking some trees out of a median that they were actually going to clear out and expand the parking area. And this was cutting from the top down. The tree was actually too big to be cut by the harvester at the base, but this shows it being cut from, taking all the limbs off of it, so all they had was the bowl left to drop. And this is collecting the biomass, bringing it out, piling it up, and you can see other products in the foreground here. It was separated out. There wasn't a large volume there, but a local logger marketed everything that we took out of there. So it worked out very well. Again, it was a reduction in cost. It wasn't any income being made. City of Oak Creek, actually that's a wrong date on here. That should be November of 2010. I didn't catch that in my edit. And we operated out there for 5 days. This was done with a grant from the Wood Education Resource Center. And we had a number of different loggers we tried to line up for this and finally got one that worked. And we did this in November, started on the 8th. This was just timing we did on 41 trees. There were actually, I believe, 90 trees taken out that day. And this just shows the amount of time for felling, bucking, and then the moving in between. So it went very quick in some of these areas. If you look at 17 trees in 30.8 minutes, 10 trees in 39.8 minutes. It was a very efficient operation, and we didn't really know what we were getting into. We had 200 trees marked out for the whole week, and I think we were at 130 by the second day. So we ended up taking a total of 516 trees out that week. Second day was one when we were filming the video, and we were operating, that's where this background photo is. We were operating along kind of a rural road, but within the city of Oak Creek. And this just shows the amount of time here again. There was a lot more logistics involved here with traffic and sometimes having to wait for traffic. In the forwarder, average time to load it is about 15 minutes, unloading 3 minutes, and we had anywhere from 100 yards to 2 miles that we had to bring the wood. So it was a challenge at times, but we had a very efficient operator, had a female operator in the forwarder who was very proficient. She's a little nervous going down the streets with especially taking the biomass tops out, but just did an excellent job. We had a city truck in front of her and a city truck behind her. So this just shows the first day we sorted products. A lot of them were just short bushy trees, is mainly biomass. Second day we didn't have any landing near us. All the wood went to 2 homeowners for firewood. And it shows day 3, but this actually was a culmination of day 1 and 3. And the products, a little bit of income came in. The pulpwood went on rail up to Wisconsin Rapids to a pulp mill, but the cost of getting it to the rail and railing it up, that was actually a break even. But again, it was cost reduction rather than them having to deal with it. We did have a mulch guy that was going to take the biomass, but we had a chipper breakdown and we ended up having to pay to dispose of the tops on the job. So overall, we ended up with a $900 bill to dispose of the biomass tops at the end when figuring the income from the logs in there. And this just shows cutting the top off of a tree here with the harvester. I'm not clicking in the right spot. Taking the bowl down at the end. 2 pieces of equipment on the road. You see the 2 guys sitting over to the right here. That was actually filming the video. This was in somebody's yard. The numbers on the trees are the diameter at DBH. I believe there was 16 trees taken out of this yard. So the city forester here did an excellent job of working with the homeowners, selling the whole project, and then getting a couple of them to participate. This is along an office building here. I think we took 6 trees out of this yard. This guy was just super with directional felling with this harvester. And then Kenosha County. This project was done in 2016. Oh, I went way too fast there. So that was my company, Renewable Resource Solutions, set up the bids, did the bid process, and worked with the logger through the harvesting process. And I was the go-between between the county and the logger. This right here is Petrifying Springs Park and Golf Course were together. Brightondale Golf Course was another one, and then Fox River Park. There's about 1,000 trees at Fox River. just under 500 at Brightondale and just under 3,000 at Petrifying Springs. So out of the 5,800 they originally inventoried, 4,200 actually came out. And again, this is just showing the map of where the trees are. This is within Fox River Park. And showing the inventory here, a total of 1,492. There's only 21 dead at the time. This was done in 2013, the inventory. By the time we cut it in 2016, well over half of the trees had already died. And the county said this actually was a good thing for them. It was a lot easier for them to sell it to the public with the mortality versus if they would have went in there when you just had this EAB just starting out. Once it had gone full blown another 2 years, because we cut it in January of 16, it was much more evident that it had to be done. So this is just, you can kind of see there's a river in the background. Was operating between the road and the river here. Just did an excellent job of felling the trees. Pulpwood here to be shipped to Wisconsin Rapids, going to a rail siding near here. And just showing pulpwood over here on the left, logs on both sides over here that were going to a sawmill. A total of 166,000 board feet of saw logs is taken out, and 1,000 cords of firewood, saw bolts, and pulpwood was also taken out of those 4,200 trees. This is Kruger Lumber Company where the saw logs went to. And this is just showing the bids. They put this out to bids to interested loggers, but also they put it in the paper, so they had tree services bidding on it. And number 5 and number 7 were the, I'm sorry, number 6 and number 7 were the 2 loggers that bid on it. So a very interesting range of prices here. 73,000 was what the logger who got the bid ended up doing, and then number 8 down here was a tree service company that had logging equipment. They did have a harvester. So these were the 3 bids with mechanized equipment. These were the traditional tree service companies. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Don. There are a couple questions that have come in. I think one really related for you, Don. In terms of the wood, you mentioned one of the case studies you worked on, the wood went to a mill, but in general, does the logger keep the wood afterwards, or does the municipality?
It depends on the size of the project. In the project, in the demonstration project, we actually marketed the wood for the municipality and used that to offset the cost. We had a grant as well. With Kenosha County, that was part of the bid, is they had the option. Some of the loggers who were bidding on it were from over 200 miles away, and they said they didn't know the markets. In that case, the municipality was going to keep the wood and market it. The logger who got the bid said he was very interested in keeping the wood, so he bid with that provision in there.
Great, thanks, Don. And as a reminder too, if you have questions, I know we're coming up on about 1 o'clock, but we'll stick around to answer all the questions you might have. Another question we have from Zachary, and maybe Brian, this is a good question for you. Has there been any other unique uses other than pulp for small volumes of softwoods like ginkgo, aspen, and linden?
I think that, there's been a variety of custom, furniture that, often with those kind of onesie twosies, there's opportunities for homeowners, that might have a special or an important tree taken down. If you, there's a commercial out there right now for Toyota, and that commercial for Toyota tells a story about a very important tree for a family that had to come down for health purposes. and it was made into a table for the grandparents. So again, I think those are some opportunities, but each species offers some unique options. Craft workers, custom furniture manufacturers, those are all possibilities. One of the challenges is sawing and drying. You got wood misers, you've got small kilns, whether it be a dehumidification kiln, or just even air drying. So there's a variety of ways that folks can deal with those specialty species.
Great, thanks, Brian. We have another question from Stanley, a question about yellow birch. Any comment on yellow birch as a high value species? This is not an urban species, but I see it a lot in wooded wetlands and remember hearing it's a beautiful, potentially high value species.
Don, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a high value species if you can get a quality tree. A lot of times yellow birch doesn't get really good form in this part of the country. There are some beautiful yellow birch trees that are very high value. I have not seen a lot of it in stands. It's very hard to regenerate, and I have not seen a lot of it on the market, to be honest with you. But it can be found, but it's rare.
Yeah, and it's my favorite. It's one of my favorite, woods out there is yellow birch. From a stately old tree. It really can make some beautiful products. But I agree with Don. It's in commercial, traditional, well-managed forests, there's maybe some volume, but I haven't seen a lot of it in urban settings.
Great. Well, thanks, Brian and Doug. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. I just wanted to remind folks in the chat area, I shared a couple of links that Brian and Don had mentioned, including the link to the publication that Brian mentioned on wood utilization and invasive species, some of the guides from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture on heat treatment, and then the Urban Wood Network, I've shared that link as well. And we'll follow up too with an email with some of these links and resources as well. So not seeing any other questions. Thanks again to Brian and Don for joining us and for speaking with us today. A quick reminder too, I saw Eli just posted it again, our next webinar series for next year. That's online and posted there. So our next webinar is Tuesday, January 16th with John Carlson of the Minnesota DNR talking about the SFIA program. So thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll sign off.
Matt, if I could just interject quickly, the bottom
Sure.
website we have there, sustainableinc.org projects. There's actually an 11-minute video on the Oak Creek project in there that's very informative. It was a little long for this presentation, but if you just look under projects, that'll pop up under Oak Creek. Thank you.
Great, yeah, and we'll make sure we get that link from you too to share in our follow-up email to the participants that watch today. Great. Well, thanks again, Brian and Don. So we'll sign off now, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.